Next, we have John Gastil, my longtime friend, who is professor of communication at Penn State, director of the McCourtney Institute. Is it McCourtney, right? Yes, McCourtney Institute for Democracy at Penn State, and written an embarrassingly large number of books, which he has promised not to list all of, but he's only going to do a short synopsis for us tonight. John.
So just give me a sense of the room here. How many people have heard of the Oregon Citizens Initiative Review? All right, so about half of you. The other half of you are about to hear about one of the coolest things in this country that you didn't know about. And they say when you go to a cocktail party, you want to come away with one good anecdote for the next party. I could be it for you. So pay attention. The rest of you, hopefully you'll learn something new because I guarantee you haven't seen at least some of this research. Cocktails. I said cocktails. Yeah, everyone's thinking about. All right. No comment. What we're going to do is I'm going to start by talking about the idea of electoral deliberation. What would an election look like, specifically an initiative election, if it was actually more deliberative? What is the Citizens Initiative Review? Is it actually deliberative? Is it having an impact? And finally, a note on sustaining a research partnership that comes from the perspective of a professor who's interested in collaborating with various practitioners, as I do with this project. So first, what is this idea of electoral deliberation? Well, our focus today is on the initiative election, where you're voting directly on legislation, which happens in many states, but also in lots of municipalities all around the country and all around the world. The problem is, it is not very deliberative. On a typical issue, whether it's a municipal bond or a gay marriage initiative statewide, the voters usually have limited knowledge of what the measures actually would do. Are they constitutional and so on? To the extent that they will answer factual questions, they exhibit systematic bias. And in fact, that's more extreme. The more politically engaged and politically knowledgeable they are, the more inaccurate their information in a systematic way. That's true. It's just funny, but it's true. It's funny in sort of a Stephen Colbert is funny kind of way, which is you're crying inside. They also don't know, good luck with the Tonight Show, buddy. They also don't know what counter arguments really are coming from the other side, a clear sign that they haven't really had to engage the issue. And to the extent that they vote with confidence, especially for partisans, they vote based on what the elites suggested they should do on that initiative without any actual analysis of why that would be the case. The Citizens Initiative Review was developed to address those kinds of problems, and basically, if you can remedy those problems, you have a more deliberative electoral process. Here's how it's built. The first and most basic step is you collect a paid stratified random sample of 24 voters who serve as citizen panelists. They're paid the average wage of an Oregonian per day. They get a week to deliberate, and I'll show you what that week looks like in a second. After their deliberation, they've created a one-page statement that goes into the official voter's guide mailed to every single registered voter household in the state of Oregon. And presumably then, the voters would get a chance to look at that, and it might influence their judgment and their knowledge. And we'll see hard data on that from extensive statewide surveys in Oregon for multiple years. Let's take a quick look, if we get lucky and the video works, and you'll get a feel for what this looks like.
For the 2010 election, Healthy Democracy Oregon ran an official test of this innovative idea. Panels of randomly selected voters, demographically balanced to reflect the entire state electorate, met over 5 days to review a measure on the ballot.
Through the process, I never knew who was a Republican or who was a Democrat.
We had all ages, all educational levels. Everyone was committed to the process and contributed in powerful and valuable ways.
All we deliberated were the facts and the issues.
For each 5-day review, a panel directly questioned the campaigns for and against a ballot measure, heard from background experts, and then deliberated together based on the facts. They issued their findings to every voter in the state through a prominent new page in the statewide voters pamphlet.
Now, knowing my audience, I know a lot of you are interested in the micro detail of what was their week like. And here's a quick overview. The full first day is spent an orientation to this process. What does it actually mean to deliberate? They go through a kind of a mock scenario. Then they meet the pro and con sides the next day. The third day, they actually are calling witnesses from a longer list that was created for them. So they get to hear the kinds of information they think they need, get pro and con arguments coming at them, and then finally they write a statement. Something I want to emphasize is the concept of groupthink, a very popular notion of what groups sometimes fall into, absolutely unobservable in this process because they're constantly under external scrutiny. They're constantly critiquing one another, and the process just is constantly churning through information. It's a very public process. And they come out with a statement that is pretty smart, has had absolutely no factual errors to date, and pretty cogent analysis that presents both what they consider key findings on the issue, but also what they think are the best pro and con arguments. Just a quick history on it is it really dates back to the citizens' jury created by Ned Crosby in the top right corner there. Back in the 1970s, an unofficial demonstration started in 2008. The legislature passed a one-year sort of trial law in 2009. Tyrone Reitman in the middle there was one of the key organizers along with Elliot Shuford. 2010, it happened. They actually convened this on 2 ballot measures. Again, this is a state law in Oregon. 2011, the legislature kind of reviewed it and thought about, do we want to keep this? And they said, yeah, let's make this a permanent process. A couple new measures in 2012, and now Arizona and Colorado are doing pilot projects. Washington, it looks like, won't happen just yet this year, but we'll see how this goes. It may very well expand beyond Oregon. Just to give you a sense for what happened in the legislature in 2011, there's your vote breakdown. So, yes, it's bipartisan support, but a lot of Republicans opposed it because they don't think government should have any role in even just convening these kinds of conversations. Over in the Senate, basically a similar result. But you can see there the Republicans were pretty evenly divided. So again, it passed the legislature. In fact, in a perfectly divided legislature, one of the chambers was 50-50. So these things can be accomplished in a bipartisan way, though you have to be realistic in looking at the numbers on a slide like this. All right. So what the CIR has done is in 2010, it considered mandatory minimum sentences. We're going to look in a little more detail at that one. The panel wound up opposing 21-3, an extremely popular measure, which ultimately passed with 57% of the vote, which was quite a bit lower than it had started with. Measure 74 that same year was on medical marijuana. 2012, there was a tax issue on the ballot, which we'll take a look at for a second, and a question of privately owned casinos. In 2010, the judgment of the panel kind of went against the final vote result, though marginally in the case of medical marijuana. In 2012, they aligned perfectly. This year, a new one was in Jackson County, Oregon, as kind of a pilot. They'll still do 2 statewide ones later this year. This was on genetically modified plants. They didn't actually technically record a vote of the panel as kind of an experiment, but the statement was pretty favorable towards the idea, and it did pass with 2/3 of the vote. All right, so is the deliberation of a high quality? The panelists themselves give it very high satisfaction ratings. That's true for citizen juries going back to the 70s. That's always the case. Our objective assessment is also quite favorable of the process. Let me give you a sense for what actually happens during the deliberation. This is measure 73, which, as I pointed out, was a pretty popular measure. It would basically make sentences tougher for repeat drunk drivers and certain kinds of sexual offenders. This slide shows you where people were before deliberation. Blue is liberals, let's say. Red is conservatives, and yellow is independents. I say let's say, but this is actually actual survey data on these folks. We had a sense for where they were when it started, and they tried to be kind of neutral about it, right? Leaning towards it, but here's where they ended up. Yeah, okay. Sometimes you can get yourself a supermajority, but more importantly, you can get a supermajority on the exact opposite side of where you would have expected. Because it was a really bad law. And it makes you think for a second, just because your ideology or your party generally likes or dislikes mandatory minimums doesn't mean that the particular law you're voting on is a good or bad one. That's what this process is so brutal about, is it gets you right down into the weeds, and you can wind up voting against something that in general you like, but in particular you dislike. So it goes into the voters pamphlet. There's a section there for that ballot measure. Just give you a taste of what kinds of things are in there. Here's from that one. Mandatory minimum sentencing has not proven a significant deterrent. 21 out of 24 agree. The evidence was pretty strong to support that claim, and they put it in. An unintended consequence is that juveniles aged 15 to 17 are subject to the mandatory minimum. Actually, the detail is it's for sending explicit pictures of themselves. The proponents acknowledge they did not intend that, but they can't deny that it's there. Okay, that's a problem. These things come up in the course of a week, and there's nothing the proponents can do if they've written a bad law. But is it actually affecting voters? Because we know that deliberation works. We've seen deliberation work. But the point of the CIR, what's so special to me about it, is that it has the potential to affect a macro-level outcome. Well, voter awareness of it isn't too bad. It's gone up from 43% to 51%. So a majority of Oregonians know about it during the election. Most of those who know about it find it at least somewhat useful, and about a quarter say it's very useful. They don't entirely trust it. About a third trust it a good deal, but their trust in it is comparable to the summaries that are written by the state government. So people just are skeptical in general. But, well, what does that add up to? Okay? If you read the CIR statement, does it actually make you more knowledgeable based on factual knowledge batteries that we gave to voters? We did basically survey experiments online where you hadn't yet read the voter's guide, you are going to vote, here are your different experimental conditions. Reading the CIR far and away makes you the more knowledgeable group. That becomes even more extreme if we take into account how confident you are in your knowledge. CIR readers not only become more knowledgeable, but they know they have it right. But does it influence your vote? We did an experiment in 2010 where if you didn't get any treatment, 2/3 of you supported mandatory minimums. If you read a silly letter from the Secretary of State, this is an experimental thing, no effect. If you read the summary and fiscal statement, a very substantive point, no effect, though now in that condition you're much more confident that you know everything you need to know, but no difference. And if you read the CIR statement, you dramatically turn against the measure. Another example from 2014, genetically modified plants. It's about a 9% shift in favor if you read that statement. In that case, there wasn't even a vote count. You weren't just following the herd. You read the statement and became more favorable towards the measure. So some final reflections. First of all, does it actually work? Yeah, the deliberation is of a very high quality. More than half the electorate are learning about it in the course of an election. The voters are appreciating it and using it. They're actually becoming more knowledgeable, and it's affecting their voting decisions. And in fact, it's actually changing their political efficacy. They're actually having a little more faith in government and a little more faith in themselves as voters. Final note here just comes from the perspective of a researcher. All this is possible because of the relationship we have with Healthy Democracy Oregon. So if you're looking for a research partner, think about these things. Researchers need full access to the process and some flexibility about data collection. We accept some constraints, but you have to let us get close to your data. That makes possible really complex research designs, which can potentially get major funding. We have 2 National Science Foundation grants, partly because of the strength of the partnership with Healthy Democracy, which lets us do really interesting studies. The frank evaluations can be helpful. In our first report, we gave something like 47 recommendations for revision. In our second NSF proposal, we predicted that things would go terribly wrong because they were changing it in ways we thought would damage it. We got the grant, and they changed the process, so we can't test those hypotheses. Independent research really boosts the credibility of the process. When we're getting these NSF grants, they are desperate to tell everyone that they're being studied by an NSF grant-funded research team. So it's helpful to them, and it's helpful to us. Finally, even the peer-reviewed publications that you may not think are terribly relevant to what you do, they absolutely matter. And legislators completely care about this. We had to testify before the legislature after the first one, and they keep bringing us back because they don't get independent evaluations of their laws. This is an exceptional situation that lets them get exactly that. So bottom line is, like I said, hopefully this is a good anecdote for you. It's a remarkable thing that we've created here in this country, passed by law by a state legislature in a divided state. And I hope you find it interesting, and thank you for the opportunity to share it with you.